Hi, welcome to Bear Mountain. Today we're making soil block mix for our minis, which are the 3/4 inch blocks that come in the standard 20 blocks per charge little hand thing. We can get 300 of those minis in a 10-20 tray, but first we have to make our mix. It's a bit windy today. Normally we wouldn't want to do this on a windy day because certain things like perlite like to blow around a bit. But we're going to show you today what our mix is. There's a whole lots of different kinds of mixes out there, but this is one we found that works for us. So what I'll do today is I'll go through and show you how we put it together, what the order is that we mix it in, and what we put in there for additives for fertility. Since these are for starting seeds, we don't put a lot of nitrogen-based type fertilizers in it. It's mostly just minerals. But as we go through, you'll see what we're doing. So the first thing we start with is some sifted peat moss. If you can get access to fine peat moss that is pre-sifted and buy it in a bales, that's certainly, your dollars ahead doing that. However, for us that supply is inconsistent, so we end up spending a lot of time sifting things out. And the reason we sift the peat moss is to get rid of any oversized material. Larger chunks of sticks or peat that is not broken up but is clumped together will tend to make the mix not work right, and will make the blocker have a very difficult time. So the first thing we do with our mini mix is it's 4 parts peat moss, 3 parts compost, 1 part perlite, a very fine perlite, which is called plug grade, which means it has no oversized pieces in it, very small pieces, and we add limestone to balance the pH, and we add our mineral-based fertilizer on top of that. So let's start the process. First things first, we're going to put in 4. We use this 2.5 gallon bucket. This is just kind of our rough measuring gauge for the peat and the perlite and the compost. So we just fill this up. As you can see, this peat moss is really fine. There's no real oversized material in it. It breaks up nicely. There's a few little clumps, but they break up pretty easy. And we use this wagon to mix in the back. We can also use our cement mixer for doing a larger load of it, but we're doing just one basic mix today, so it didn't make a whole lot of sense to fire that guy up. If you have to sift your peat moss, I'd recommend looking at our blog entry on how to make a sifter. And secondly, I would recommend, when you have a good day, that you make some of the sifted material ahead of time. That way when you need it, you don't have to spend time sifting it. Okay, we now got the 4 buckets of peat, and as you can see, there's a little bit of moisture left in it, and some spots are a little drier than others. But as we mix things up, these dry spots will blend into it. You want to have a little bit of dampness to the peat moss, and here's the reason why is what you'll find is it'll absorb water better at a later time when you want to mix it up. If you have absolutely dry peat moss, the first thing I would do is, when you dump it in, is add a little bit of water just to bring it up to a feeling like there's just a little bit of dampness to it. It just makes mixing better, and things tend to just work better with a little bit of moisture in it. So next step we're going to do is we're going to add 2 cups of dolomitic limestone. We use the number 65 screen, very fine. Now some people use just a half cup or a cup. We tend to put a little more in. Tends to help us balance out the pH a little better. Although we still do get a little bit of algae growth. Peat moss tends to have a bit of problem with that. So once we get that kind of spread around, And the other thing damp peat moss does is help spread these finer things and the minerals and stuff around a lot better. And we just kind of mix. It's just kind of like making bread. You want to mix it so real good so you don't see any like spots of lime that are just, you know, not mixing in at all. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next step, which is we add 1 bucket of the fine perlite, and that'll be our next step. We use the same size bucket as we do for the peat. Now this is called plug grade perlite, and you can get this from nursery supply places. And the difference between this and regular perlite has a lot of odd or different shaped pieces to it. This has been screened basically for fine materials that are probably 1/16 or 1/8 of an inch or less. New bags are a little heavy. Okay, this is the part that's challenged for a windy day. So, as you can see, this material is pretty fine. It also has a fair amount of dust in it too, which is another advantage of having damp peat moss is the dust will still, you're going to get a little bit of blowback on it, but not as much. So we just carefully kind of pour the material in. You can tell there was a little bit of dust with this. If you're very sensitive to this, you know, get a dust mask. I'm kind of okay. The wind is kind of blowing a little bit away from me. Can't say so much that the camera person was as lucky, Anthony's, right? So anyway, our next step now is to just gently mix the material in. And you don't want to be too aggressive at this point until you get it fairly well mixed in, because otherwise you're just going to be creating a lot of dust. So this is again the advantage of having moisture in your mix while you're doing this. It cuts the dust down and it makes it just easier to mix it apart. And we want to make sure we get it evenly spread out all over. And see, now you get a little more aggressive once you got it basically mixed in. As you can see now, there's no dust. Just kind of flip it around, make sure it's all nice and mixed up. And this stuff works really well in the mini blocker and still gives you enough extra pore space, reduces the compaction a little bit so the roots of your starts can get just a little more pore space to deal with. Okay, now we're ready to move on to the next step. Okay, the next step is adding the minerals. And we have a two-stage process. The first thing is, this is something we do that's probably a little different than most people. We use biochar that's been activated, and we use it at a ratio of about 1 to 2% relative to the overall final mix. When we get finished with the mix, we're going to have about 5 cubic feet of mix ready to go. And this is roughly equates to about a little less than 2% of that mix. Now, just as a side note, and we'll do a video on this when we do our next round of biochar, but activated means when you get biochar, it has a very strong tendency to absorb water and absorb minerals. And so you have to give it a period of time of at minimum 2 weeks, but 3 to 4 weeks of sitting time. What we do is we mix it up with worm castings, basalt rock dust, and believe it or not, some just regular bread flour. And what that does is once you wet it down and you mix it up and you set it aside someplace cool and dark, it really works to take the biochar and get it into a form that's useful right away. So it's not going to suck any of your fertility out of your rest of your mix. It's actually going to help retain fertilizer you put on and retain water when you water, so you can actually get away with watering a little less. So we'll mix this in first, and it doesn't even look like charcoal anymore. It looks more like just kind of a blue-gray powder, and it's got a good amount of fertility in it with the worm castings, but it's not really a high nitrogen thing. And it's definitely got a lot of fungal, so that's good to go. We'll just mix this up nice and easy, and make sure that that gets spread around. The fertility part of it is, after we've added the biochar, we add 2 cups of Calphos, and if you have like a rock powder, you could use 2 cups of that, and or green sand. Either one of those work well. And then we put in another 2 cups of worm castings. We mix that material up, kind of make sure before we pour it in that it's kind of mixed up pretty well. Everybody's got a little different dew on it, but the basics of what we're trying to get to is an adequate level of available phosphorus and available trace minerals. And we just put that in, and then we work it up. It's the same idea. You want to spread it around. Just make sure that the whole thing's well distributed. That's the whole key. Okay, now we've got everything ready to go except the last step, which is the compost, and we use a sifted compost for that too. Our compost is purchased off-site. Our own compost is used basically just for field fertility, but this material has enough material that when you sift it, it's fine enough that it takes the oversized material out, such that when you use it in the blocker, again, you don't get any jams in it. Same idea. We use the same size bucket that we did for the peat and the perlite. And the idea is we want to put 3 of these guys in. Okay, this is the first bucket. Now, we're going to do a little mix in between each bucket. And the whole reason we want to do this is we want to make sure that this stuff is evenly dispersed throughout the mix. As you can see, there's no oversized material in it. It's really pretty good shape. So we're just going to do the same thing again, kind of spread it around, and we mix it up. And then once that's all kind of spread around, then we'll do the next bucket, and then we'll do the same thing with the last one. Okay, we're mixing in the final bucket of compost now. We've got all 3 of them in, and we're just going to make certain that it's well distributed. The whole idea of mixing each one individually is to help with the distribution, to make sure that it doesn't clump up someplace where you have more compost, and also to
it just helps, you know, the other components you've added and continually mixing them around as well. Now, one of the questions might come up and say, well, this is great for minis, but can I just use this same mix for you know, the larger blocks, like a 2-inch or a 1.5, or even the new 1 1/8? And well, yeah, technically you could use it, but you're gonna have a lot more pore space if you mix the batches separately with a larger aggregate of what they call propagation grade perlite. And the whole point of growing on too is you want to make sure there's adequate pore space in the block that it's growing into. This will still give you pore space, but it'll be a denser block. And being larger, it would probably dry, well, not dry, but it would probably tend to be, you're going to use a lot more mix per tray than you would otherwise. So it actually end up being more expensive to do larger blocks with this. So anyway, once we finish up the final mix, this material is good to go. And you can make this ahead of time, and as an example, and just, you know, store it until you're ready to use it. Try to store it in something where you can maintain some moisture on it. Actually, the longer it sits, and sometimes it gets even a little better. But it's really basically good to go at this point. And we have a nice, fluffy, very fine mix that we can use with our mini blocker. If you like what you see here, please hit the subscribe button. You see our logo down in the corner. If I got it right, one or the other. It's going to be one on the left or the right. And also too, we're going to put a link in here to our previous blog on about sifting and the sifter we made, so you can kind of take a look at that. And if you have any questions or anything, be sure to post them. And I want to thank you today for watching, and hope this helps to answer some of the questions on soil blocking. We're going to be doing a few more videos on this as we go through the process with the different size blockers and how we bump things up, etc. So there'll be a few more of these, and look for the section under playlist called Soil Blocks, and this stuff will be in it. So you have a good day, and thanks for watching.